Travelling along at 60 miles an hour, avoiding all the flashy, shining cars. All were dashing quickly to and fro. It was then I noticed a man upon the road with his guitar and his bedroll. I began to wonder where he was going. Travelling man, travelling man, you keep on travelling on the road, going through life all on your own. Sometimes you must get very weary.
Welcome to the Vision Channel again. I'm Ron Jones. My special guest today is Roger Laughton. And Roger is quite a successful businessman now, but it hasn't always been the case. His life has seen many ups and downs and many reversals, as you will find out as we chat together in this program. Roger, welcome to the Vision Channel.
Thank you.
Now, I know that your dad died when you were just about 5 years of age. Tell me a little bit about your home life and how you coped with things and so on.
When I was young, my father died. He died, committed suicide.
Did he?
Shot himself. My mother kept it from me, and my grandmother kept it from me. So it was quite cruel at 5 years old. The first I knew was being taunted at school in the playground with the other children shouting, your dad killed himself, your dad shot himself. And other children would then shout, your mum only married him for money. He was a lot older than my mother.
Yes.
And he was very loving, I remember, as a very young child. But from the time that he died, I wouldn't say that childhood was particularly nice or friendly. It was cold.
Did you live with at home with your mother then, or something like that?
I did for a while. But then we moved to my grandmother's, and she took over the main role of looking after me and my sister. My mother didn't seem to be very maternal from an early age on.
So what you're telling me in actual fact is that you had a bit of a difficult childhood. It must have been a shocker for your dad to commit suicide when you were just 5.
It was, yes.
Must have left scars on you in some way or another.
I think the hardest scars came from not being loved by either parent, my father going, and then my mother. I never had an experience of love at home.
No.
It was always cold, and in a emotional sense it was cold and unloving.
Yes. Now at 11 years of age, you gained a place in a school for gifted children. Tell me, how gifted were you, and what advantage did you take of that terrific opportunity? A school for gifted children, it sounds absolutely fantastic.
It was awful, really, I thought. The discipline was hard. The learning was great. The schools produced prime ministers and executives and ambassadors, but I didn't cope well with the discipline. I'd had so much discipline at home, I think. I didn't cope with the discipline. I didn't cope with the regulations, and I hated every day of it, really.
Now, am I right when I say you left school about 16 years of age and got a job where?
In a local garage as a mechanic, and in the stores, and generally helping out in there. I hated, and I ran away from school before I was due to take exams.
Yeah.
And went into this garage. I just went around and said, "Can you give me a job? I hate it where I am."
Yes.
And they did.
Tell me this now. It's interesting. If I put my car in that garage and you tell me you were a mechanic, what experience had you had to be a mechanic when you went into the garage?
I'd had none. I hadn't had a lot when I left there either. But I didn't have any experience. I just went in and said, "Can you give me a job?"
Yeah. And how long were you there?
Oh, I suppose about 7 months, 6, 7 months, that was all.
And what did you do after that?
Well, I joined the services.
Now, somebody told me that you were a drunkard for around 30 years. Tell me how you came to have your first drink?
The boys from the garage took me out. I was 16 and they took me out to a pub and I became incredibly drunk. I went home and fell asleep on a sofa, being sick all over the place.
Yeah.
And that was my first experience, I suppose. And I was terribly ill the next day. But I never from that day on drank without being hopelessly drunk. I seemed incapable of stopping. Suddenly I think it was the escapism, suddenly away from the reality of life.
Yeah.
And here was something that gave me a different...
But at the end of the escape, you had to come back to the reality of life anyway, didn't you?
Well, the trouble is you just drink again then.
Yes.
And
It's a
try to lose it.
It's a kind of a spiral thing.
Yes.
Now, you did mention that you lost your job, obviously,
I
and
did.
you joined the forces, and you did 12 years. You stumbled. I think the expression is you stumbled through 12 years in the forces, but it was during that time in the forces, near the end perhaps, that you came into contact with what they call a head shrinker. Tell me about head shrinkers.
Well, the Air Force and all the services give you a great deal of protection from yourself, I think. Throughout the years in there, if you get drunk, if you get in trouble, they lock you up, they give you treatment, they carry you through life, and you don't have to face up to realities of not getting paid, of getting the sack. You can go in and out of hospitals, and while in Germany I was first taken in for the first lot of treatment and met my first psychiatrist. I didn't think he was awfully bright, and I didn't go along with a lot of what he said, but it was the first of a number of courses of treatment I had in the services.
Oh, so you had more than one such treatment, that's what you're telling me.
I did, yes.
So you must have got into a mess. We'll come to that in a few minutes. Now, somewhere along the line, I think it was probably near your last 12 months or so in the forces that you ruptured a major artery that has something to do with leading to the brain. Tell me about that, how it happened, and what were the consequences of it?
I'd been in and out of hospital in the Air Force for various things, and I knocked myself around, damaged myself falling, and the level of drinking was causing problems with my heart and circulation system. And I'd been out of hospital only a short time, and I was walking through the street in Cardiff.
Yes.
And suddenly blood started to pump from my nose and mouth, and it pumped into my lungs, and I collapsed. And the main artery, the carotid artery, I've got a scar here where it was.
Excuse me, the what artery?
The carotid artery.
Carotid artery, yes.
Had burst,
Yeah.
and pumping out blood, and the chances of survival were quite slim then. But I was outside a hospital in the street in Cardiff,
Yeah.
and they grabbed me and rushed me in there and plugged it. But that failed, and I finished up having surgery over Christmas Day and Boxing Day, where the artery was tied off.
Right. And now it's obvious that you survived that, or you wouldn't be here today. But did you learn any lessons from that? Or was it back onto the same old spiral as before?
No, I was actually angry about it. I was in a rage. I was angry. Why me? Why am I falling apart? Why is life so dreadful to me? Why? It's everybody else's fault, isn't it? All the world's against you. And when arteries burst, that's just something else that's piling on.
Is that typical with alcoholics, that everybody else is to blame?
I think so. Who wants to face up to themselves being to blame? Who wants to blame themselves for the mess they're in when it's easier to look at other people
Yeah.
and blame them?
I was just thinking now about your wife. It must have been like living in a hell for her. How did your wife cope with these things?
She didn't. By then, that was my second marriage, and we didn't remain married a great deal longer after that. I was getting through the family finances. I'd left the services soon after, and things started to come apart completely.
Yeah. Well, with such a record as you had, okay, when you came out of the forces, how on earth did you manage to get employed, or did you just employ yourself?
I became self-employed. I was selling whatever I could get a job selling.
Tell me
And,
what you sold then.
I sold double glazing.
Yeah.
I sold replacement windows. I sold cavity wall infilling. I sold men's wigs.
Did you?
I did, yes. I had to go in and look at bald-headed people and draw patterns on their heads and
Yeah.
design wigs for them. But you only have to make 1 or 2 sales a week in any of these things, and you make a lot of money.
Yes.
You can pick up £800-900 from one sale of windows or double glazing.
Yeah.
And I got £150 for each wig I sold. And men are quite vain. It's easy to sell wigs to a chap who wishes he was younger.
Are you looking for customers?
No, not yet.
Well, okay, because I was thinking of the commission thing. I understand that you had a car crash. In actual fact, you drove into a lorry, probably on the wrong side of the road. Were you drunk? And what were the consequences of that crash?
I was very drunk. I'd been drinking with another chap in Bath, and we'd drunk a bottle of whiskey each. And I left to drive home the 9 miles from Bath to Bristol. And I was driving very fast, and I was on the wrong side of the road, I'm told. I didn't know a great deal about it. I hit a lorry coming the other way. I wrote off the lorry as well as my car. And my neck and back were broken. My knee, hip, my rib cage was caved in, and I was taken to the Bath Royal United Hospital.
What hope did they give you?
There was nothing particularly life-threatening. My head wasn't badly damaged. It was just all the bones were broken. I couldn't move my left arm, and there was talk about whether that would ever move because of the damage to my neck. And I had to have another hip fitted.
Yeah.
A false hip fitted.
Yes.
But
was it there whilst in hospital that you decided that you ought to join Alcohol Anonymous, or was that some other time, later time?
When I was actually in hospital there on a day patient basis for 3 years, having treatment. I was going in every day by ambulance for 3 years, and I didn't really try to get sober then, but that was the first time I was introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous. I phoned them, I met up with them, and I went to some meetings, and they came to see me.
Yes.
But I didn't make any commitments to sobriety immediately.
But did it help you then, or were you sober for some time?
It helped me because you can't drink while you're in hospital, but there was one chap who used to smuggle me in drink.
Yes.
Into the ward.
Now, in Alcohol Anonymous, this youngster who went to a school for gifted children showed his gifts, and you got somewhere to the top and handled the money. Am I right?
When I did get sober eventually properly, I was sober for 7 years.
Were you?
And during that time I qualified as an accountant, I went to university, I bought a newsagent's tobacconist shop, and things were doing quite well. And I don't know why, but I became the leader of a large group, and I was responsible for collecting money each time as the treasurer and the leader of this group. I've no idea why after 7 years I couldn't stand it any longer. One difficulty with Alcoholics Anonymous, and I believe that alcoholics should go there, it keeps you sober, but it does replace drink with another crutch to a large extent, and I was fed up, I think, with going to meetings 3 or 4 times a week and being constantly told that without them I would be drunk.
Yeah.
And there's a constant reliance on this as a support.
Yes. Tell me about the money situation. That's what I'm interested in.
Well, when I'd reached a point where I couldn't go on, I just picked up the money one day.
Were you kind of treasurer?
I was treasurer.
Yeah.
And I walked off with all the kitty, all the takings, and went drinking. And I finished up actually drinking in Germany in a horrendous state.
Did you?
And I was brought back from there to a treatment centre at Canterbury.
I was going to mention that you were soon back into a treatment centre. Now, how did they deal with a fellow who had already done 7 years in Alcohol Anonymous?
I think that that the health service employs psychiatrists who think they know better anyway. And I was in the treatment centre in Canterbury, and they transferred me down to a treatment centre in Bristol. And the psychiatrist there was quite a whiz kid and thought he had all the answers. And I did the first of a 6-week course in there, partly based on Alcoholics Anonymous and partly based on his own psychiatric analysis of the lunatics who constantly get drunk.
Yeah. And were you on oxygen there? Were you under an oxygen tent?
I was on oxygen while I was in Canterbury, and I was being taken off of drink and drugs to get me through the DTs. I was drugged and kept on oxygen.
Yes. Now, as I've listened to you, Roger, if I said that from all that you've told me, it seems to me that you came almost to a kind of gutter life, spending most of your time in down and out pubs and all the rest of it. If I said that to you, how right would I be?
Absolutely right. I think most of us who are alcoholics do. I went through 3 treatment centres and continued to deteriorate until I finished up living rough in Bristol and staying at the Salvation Army and at a rehabilitation unit opposite the Salvation Army, where I was thrown out. I've slept in all manner of dreadful places, and in places with other people that have broken into. And
yes. Now, it's obvious to me that in the circumstances in which you found yourself, there must have been a group of drinking pals. Do you ever think of them now?
I look back with sorrow at some. There were, I suppose, 8 or 9 of us. 2 of them are now Christians. And I've met them, one at Glastonbury on fire with his arms raised up, praising God.
Yes.
The rest of them, most I watched die. People fall downstairs and choked on vomit. One of the ladies, one of the men fell dead in White Ladies Road in Bristol.
Just dropped dead?
He did, yes. His heart had stopped. Another, his pancreas ruptured while he was in the middle of drinking. And one after another, people died around me. And I should have done the same, really. I certainly tried very hard.
So do you feel that God must have had his hand on your life or something?
When I look back now, I'm amazed to see how much he stayed close to me throughout those years while I was so far from him.
Yes. Now, you did tell me that when you were in Alcohol Anonymous, you took exams and so on, which enabled you to enter into accountancy, and you got your own business. How long did it take you to build up that business?
Not very long. I was fortunate that another fellow who's a chartered accountant in Bristol took me on fairly quickly. He was struggling for work for employees, and he took me on to work part-time for him as a self-employed person.
Yeah.
And so I had some income while I was building up my business, but it was fine while I was sober. I'd been through a treatment centre a few times, and I had periods of sobriety,
yes,
followed by periods of crushing drunkenness where nothing was done, and I lost homes again. And
yeah. Now, in I think it might have been the summer of 1990, you went on a holiday to Turkey, and it was there you met a German gentleman. How did that eventually become absolutely vital in your life?
When I went there, I'd been unable to walk for some years. I'd had false hips fitted, 3 altogether in one side, and I'd fallen, dislocated them, broken them, and eventually I had no hip in at all, and I was walking with crutches, and I had a 3-inch built-up boot on one leg.
Yeah.
I didn't walk at all, really. And it was while I was over there, miles from where tourists go, there wasn't another soul around, this German came over to me and asked me why I couldn't walk. It turned out that he was a doctor.
Yeah.
And he told me that he knew where I could have surgery to repair this. I'd been to hospitals in Bath and Bristol and been told that nothing could be done for me.
Yeah.
And this chap came miles from anywhere,
Out of the blue.
out of the blue, in a
Yeah.
deserted place, and came to me and told me where I could have my legs repaired and be made to walk again.
Did he mention some doctor's name to you?
He did. Professor Robleski, I'll put it on record, the chap who, with Charnley, invented the first false hip.
Is that right? And now, where did he live then?
He runs a hip research unit funded by the government
Yes.
just outside Wigan.
Yes.
I thought this German was going to tell me of some exotic place in the Far East or far off.
Yeah.
And he said, there's a place near Wigan in England.
And-
And yet none of the hospitals
I told you
in
that.
Bristol knew about it or had told me about it.
Oh, so there was a ray of hope, but it wasn't very long. I think 1991. There came a moment when you were told that you could not survive more than 2 hours. Tell me what happened.
In the February of 91,
Yeah.
Professor Robleski repaired my legs and I was walking. In the June of 91, suddenly I was unable to walk completely, and I thought something had gone wrong with my hip.
And it just happened.
It happened. I'd been very, very drunk all weekend, and on the
Yeah.
Monday I was unable to walk, and I'd been in a dreadful state, and I thought something had gone wrong with my hips. And so I got into the car somehow, and I went to Wigan to see Professor Robleski. He said it's not my hips, and he took x-rays and found that the main artery in the body, the aorta, that leaves the heart and carries all the body's blood supply,
Yeah.
had got an enormous aneurysm, a great lump on it, a bulge, and it was splitting and started to bleed. He put me in an ambulance and rushed me off to a hospital at Wigan,
Yes.
which was the main hospital at Wigan.
Yeah.
Surgeons there told me they couldn't do anything for me, and so they put me back in the ambulance again and took me to another hospital
Yeah.
where I saw a Mr. Mosley,
Yes.
surgeon, who told me that my chances of survival were virtually non-existent.
Which hospital was that? Can you
This was
remember?
at Lee.
At
Lee
Lee.
Infirmary.
Yes.
This chap had seen surgery in America
Yes.
on this type of thing, and yet he told me that even with all the surgery that had been done, only some 5% had ever survived
Yes.
an actual ruptured aorta. They've been repaired before they rupture, but once they rupture and start to bleed,
Yes.
survival is...
So what happened then?
He told me that I wasn't going to survive, and I was really quite fearful and troubled. And he prepared me for surgery. This was 7 o'clock in the evening when I was going into surgery.
Yeah.
And amazingly, just before I went into the surgery, I suddenly knew, with an absolute conviction, I don't know why or how, I knew with a conviction that I would live. And that there was a purpose why I would live. In the meantime, he'd phoned my mother,
Yes.
who's now elderly, and told her that I wouldn't survive. And yet I felt that I would live.
Terrific. Now you did tell me something like this in a private chat that we had, that there came a moment when you felt that there was a purpose in life more than you had ever discovered, and that it was time to give your life to God, or you had to get right with God. I think that was the expression. Was it at that particular time that those sort of things came to your mind?
After the surgery, the surgeon told me he had found so much disease inside that
Yeah.
I wasn't going to survive more than a few months anyway. And I've been terminally ill for 10 years now, and I'm as fit as a flea, and they tell me now that I'm over it and I'm going to survive. But I was in the terminal ward at the BRI then, and during that period I knew that I had to be right with God. I'd known from youth that God was absolute and real, and I there gave my life to him, and he's been with me for
In the hospital?
Yes,
In the hospital.
yes.
You gave your life to him in the hospital.
I did. I
Right.
went from there to the City Temple.
Did you? Good church.
Great.
Now, Roger, in a private chat with me, in the midst of all that mess, you told me that you felt that there was a purpose to life more than you'd ever known, and that you needed to get right with God. What happened and what change did it make?
It was back from when I was a child. None of my relations or family were believers. All were atheists, and I was brought up that way. And yet when I went to school and first in religious education heard the stories of Jesus and heard of the Bible message and heard of God the Creator, I believed it with a burning passion then throughout my teenage years. And they caused me immense troubles during my drinking years,
Yes.
that belief. But I've always known of God, and when I became sober then, I knew that he would be the answer to all my troubles. I'd known while I was going in for surgery, I think, that I would live for a purpose.
Yes.
And I knew when I was at the terminal ward that there was a purpose.
That God had a purpose for your life.
Yes, and that the reason I'd gone through these things, I brought them upon myself,
Yes.
but they must be used to God's glory.
Yes. Now, Roger, your life has been quite notorious, really, and it seems to me that it would have continued like that if you hadn't handed over the management to God. Now, as you look back, what do you feel about it? And we've just got a minute or so.
I think that I was quite difficult to persuade. I think God realised that I had to go through a lot more than most before I could see the point or hear the message. It took a lot of severe illnesses and diseases for me finally to come to terms
Yes.
with myself and where I needed to be. And as I look back now, I rue a lost life. And yet I see that it can be used so much now for God's glory. There are
Yes.
so many others in my position.
Yes.
And I have a passion for telling people that Jesus is the answer.
Can I say, as we finish, that what you've just told me, that you have a burning passion to share with others that Jesus is the answer, is that your priority now?
Absolutely. I go out now onto the streets of Bristol, into the parks around. I take sandwiches and I go to tell people that there is another way, and it's an eternal way, and that is my purpose in life now.
Roger, believe it or not, we've arrived at our last minute. I'd like you just to tell me in one sentence what Jesus Christ means to you right now.
He's brought me healing, he's brought me peace, he's brought me freedom from the desire for alcohol, for cigarettes, for smoking, for anything that makes life dirty. He's brought me an eternal purpose in life. He's brought me freedom and love.
Great. That's a great answer. And not only a great answer, it's a great truth. For that's just what Jesus does. Thank you, Roger Laughton, for giving the time to talk to me again. And we pray that God will continue to bless you and use you for his glory and the extension of his kingdom.
Thank you.
What a life. What a mess. It seems that it would be absolutely hopeless to try and do anything with that. But then I remember the scripture that tells me that if any man commits his life to Christ Jesus, he becomes a new person. Old things are passed away and everything becomes new. And if ever there was a living proof of that, Roger Laughton is just that. So thanks for being with me today. Thanks to the camera crew for all their help, and our prayers go with you that God will bless you and all who you love. See you somewhere on the road again. Goodbye for this time.
Traveling man, you keep on traveling on the road, going through life all on your